For 5 years, she handed me a glass of water and said, "Here are your vitamins, Mom." I took them with a smile. But she wasn't giving me vitamins, she was giving me poison. The clinking of that little pill in the glass became the soundtrack to my slow decay, a sound I heard even in my sleep. What she didn't know was that I never swallowed a single one. What the doctors found in the old porcelain pot where I hid them all shattered everything. So stay with me until the end. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, whether it's your city, your work, or even the couch at home. My name is Margaret Miller, and I am 71 years old. I live in the same house in Frankenmuth, Michigan, that my husband George and I bought when we were young. It's a sturdy, half-timbered home, the kind that's supposed to stand for generations. After George passed, the house grew quiet. The warm, sweet scent of the apple strudels I was known for all over the county faded, replaced by the sterile smell of lemon polish and the faint, dusty aroma of memories. My life became small, measured by the blooming of my blue hydrangeas and the hum of the AM radio in the afternoons. My only son, David, is a good boy, but his work hauling auto parts to Detroit keeps him on the road more than it keeps him home. His absence created a space that his wife, Brenda, filled completely. She was the perfect daughter-in-law, always smiling, always helpful. She brought groceries, paid my bills, and made sure I was never lonely. To everyone in our small town, she was a saint, the devoted caregiver to a frail old woman. For a long time, I believed it too, grateful for her presence. Every night, just before bed, Brenda would perform her most important ritual of care. She'd bring me a small glass of water and a single white pill. "Your vitamins, Mom," she'd say, her voice as smooth as cream, "to keep your bones strong." For 5 years, this was our routine. Her smile, the pill in my palm, the cool water. But those pills weren't making me stronger. They were a slow, methodical poison. And the day the hospital confirmed it, my world tilted on its axis. The betrayal was so absolute, it felt like it had stolen the very air from my lungs. The suspicion didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It crept in like a fog. It began about a year into the nightly ritual. I was in my garden, tending to the hydrangeas George had planted for me, and I couldn't remember their name. The word was gone, vanished from my mind. A few minutes later, a strange, persistent tingling started in my fingertips, a pins and needles sensation that was both numb and painful. It was unsettling, a glitch in the familiar machinery of my own body. That was the first time I connected the feeling to the pill I had taken the night before. I tried to dismiss it, of course. "You're just getting old, Margaret," I whispered to myself, echoing the gentle, condescending tone everyone used with me now. Brenda was especially good at it. "Oh, Mom, we all have our senior moments," she'd say with a light laugh, patting my hand if I forgot a name or misplaced my reading glasses. Her reassurance felt less like comfort and more like a gentle push, guiding me toward the conclusion that my mind and body were simply, naturally, failing me. But the fear was a stubborn weed. It took root in the quiet hours of the night, twisting around my thoughts. I started noticing things, the way Brenda's eyes would linger on my face for a second too long after I took the pill, a flicker of something clinical and detached in her gaze, or how my fatigue had become a lead blanket I couldn't throw off, no matter how much I slept. The vibrant woman who once baked dozens of strudels before dawn was gone, replaced by a ghost who drifted through her own home. One Tuesday night, the doubt became too loud to ignore. Brenda handed me the pill, and as I brought the glass to my lips, I made a decision. I let the pill rest under my tongue, the chalky, bitter taste flooding my mouth as I pretended to swallow. She smiled, took the empty glass, and left. I stood frozen in the kitchen until I heard her car pull away, then spat the vile thing into my hand. It was a small act of defiance, a secret I didn't even understand yet. I hid it in an old porcelain mustard pot of my mother's, a dark, heavy thing I kept in the back of the pantry. That small act of rebellion became my nightly ritual. The first pill looked so lonely in the bottom of that pot, a tiny white speck of doubt. But soon, it had company. Every night for 5 years, I perfected the art of deception. I would hold the pill under my tongue, drink the water, and thank Brenda for her kindness. The moment she was gone, I would retrieve the bitter tablet and add it to the growing collection. That mustard pot became the keeper of my terrible secret. I still didn't know what the pills were, only that they were not what she claimed. I just knew that my very survival depended on this silent, daily betrayal of her trust in my obedience. The physical decline was gradual, insidious. My friends from the Lutheran church would comment on how thin I was getting, their faces etched with concern. "Margaret, you look like a strong wind could blow you over," one of them, Eleanor, said after service one Sunday. Brenda, who was always by my side, would wrap an arm around my shoulders protectively. "We're doing our best," she'd sigh, a perfect portrait of a worried daughter-in-law. "The doctor says it's just her age catching up with her. Her appetite isn't what it used to be." Her words painted me as a fragile antique, fading gracefully, when in reality, I felt like I was being systematically dismantled from the inside out. The collection in the porcelain pot grew. Dozens of pills became hundreds. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the house was silent except for its old-age groans, I would take the pot down from the shelf. I'd pour the pills onto the kitchen table, a cascade of white that looked like bleached bones under the dim light. They were a testament to my fear and my patience. Each one represented a night I had survived, a small victory in a war no one else knew I was fighting. They were the only proof I had that I wasn't going crazy. My son, David, remained a distant, comforting voice on the phone. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he'd ask, his voice tired from the road. I wanted to scream the truth at him. "Your wife is poisoning me, David," slowly, patiently, with a smile on her face. But the words would die in my throat. How could I say that to him? He adored Brenda. She had built a perfect world for him, for them. Telling him would not only break his heart, it would make me sound senile, paranoid. He would choose his wife, and I would be left completely alone, with my delusions as proof of my failing mind. This secret was the loneliest burden I have ever carried. It built a wall of glass between me and the rest of the world. I could see them, hear them, but I couldn't reach them, and they couldn't truly see me. They saw Margaret Miller, the sweet old baker who was getting a bit forgetful. They didn't see the prisoner in her own home, the woman who analyzed every sip of water, every bite of food that her caregiver prepared. I was living in a state of quiet, constant vigilance, and the effort was exhausting me more than any poison could. One afternoon, Brenda brought over a freshly baked apple. Strudel, my own recipe. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples, which used to fill me with such joy, now turned my stomach. It felt like a mockery. "I made your favorite," she said, setting it on the counter with a flourish. "Just like you taught me." I forced a weak smile and told her my stomach was upset, that I couldn't possibly eat a bite. I saw a flash of annoyance in her eyes before it was replaced by her usual mask of sweet concern. "Oh, you poor thing. Maybe just a little something. Later." She never pushed, which was somehow more sinister. My home, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a cage decorated with my own memories. The dark wood furniture George and I had picked out, the faded photographs on the mantelpiece, they all seemed to be watching me, silent witnesses to this slow, unfolding crime. Brenda moved through the rooms with an air of ownership, sometimes rearranging a vase or dusting a frame with a familiarity that chilled me to the bone. She was not just caring. For me, she was waiting for me to fade away completely so she could take my place. The breaking point came on a cold Thursday in October. I was walking from the kitchen to the living room when a wave of dizziness washed over me. My legs gave out, and I crumpled to the floor. For a terrifying minute, I lay there, the pattern of the Persian rug pressed against my cheek, and I couldn't remember my own address. The numbers, the street name, all gone. The fog in my mind was thicker than ever. Before. It was in that moment, gasping for air on the floor of my silent house, that I knew. If I didn't act now, I would die here, and everyone would call it a tragedy of old age. That night, after I added another pill to the pot, I didn't go to sleep. I sat in George's old velvet armchair and planned. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but for the first time in years, it was joined by something else, a cold, hard resolve. Brenda thought I was weak, a confused old woman who was slowly losing her grip on reality. She had underestimated me. She had forgotten that I was a woman who understood precision, who knew that the right ingredients, measured carefully, could create whatever you wanted. My new recipe would not be for strudel. It would be for justice. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The decision settled deep in my bones. The air in my bedroom felt different, charged and clear. I dressed with purpose, choosing a sturdy wool coat and my most comfortable shoes. It felt like preparing for battle. My hands trembled as I took down the heavy porcelain pot. I didn't count the pills. I just poured a large handful into a clean jam jar, the rattling sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. The pot felt lighter, but my heart was a stone in my chest. This was it. There was no turning back. The drive to Ann Arbor was just over an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. I kept the radio off, needing the silence to fortify my nerves. The flat Michigan landscape rolled by, a blur of autumn-colored trees and stark, empty fields. The jam jar sat on the passenger seat, its contents a constant, rattling reminder of my mission. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I wasn't just driving to a hospital. I was driving away from the life I had known, and I had no idea what I would be driving back to. During the drive, my thoughts kept circling back to David. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike on this very stretch of road. His small hands gripping the handlebars, his face a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "I won't let you fall, Davy," I had promised him. And now I was on my way to tell strangers that the woman he loved, the woman he had built a life with, was a monster. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. I was about to let him fall, and the impact was going to shatter him. The University of Michigan Hospital was a sprawling, intimidating complex of brick and glass. It smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Walking through the automatic doors, I felt utterly alone, a small, gray-haired woman with a terrible secret in a jar. I was directed to a lab, where I met a young doctor with kind but skeptical eyes. I tried to explain myself without sounding like a lunatic. "My daughter-in-law gives me these," I said, my voice barely a whisper as I pushed the jar across the counter. "She says they're vitamins for my bones. I need to know what they really are." He took the jar, his expression unreadable. He asked a few gentle questions about my health, my symptoms. I could see the professional doubt warring with his compassion. He probably saw dozens of confused elderly patients a day. "We can certainly run an analysis, Mrs. Miller," he said finally, his tone carefully neutral. "But it will take a few days to get the results. We'll call you as soon as we know anything." He gave me a receipt for the sample, and just like that, it was out of my hands. Those days of waiting were the purest form of torture I have ever endured. Each time the phone rang, my heart would hammer against my ribs. Brenda's daily visits became almost unbearable. I had to sit at my kitchen table, sipping the tea she made me, and listen to her chatter about her day while smiling and nodding. Her cheerfulness was a weapon, her kindness a form of violence. I had to pretend everything was normal, that the dizziness and fatigue were just part of the usual decline. I was acting for my life, and I had never felt more like a ghost. On the third day, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar Ann Arbor number. I picked it up, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it to my ear. It was the young doctor. His voice was different this time. All the skepticism was gone, replaced by a calm, serious gravity. "Mrs. Miller," he began, "we have the results of the analysis on the pills you brought in." I held my breath, the silence in my kitchen stretching into a vast, empty canyon. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I think you need to sit down." I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. In that moment, I knew my life was irrevocably fractured. There was the life before this phone call, a life of quiet fear, of secret defiance, of a lonely, desperate hope that I was wrong. And then there was whatever came after. I was no longer just a suspicious old woman. I was a victim with proof. I was trapped between a terrible, undeniable truth and the family I was about to tear apart with it. The doctor's voice continued on the line, but I could barely hear him over the sound of my own world breaking. The doctor's voice on the other end of the line was calm, almost unnaturally so, a stark contrast to the violent storm erupting inside my chest. "Mrs. Miller," he repeated, his words precise and clinical, "the pills you brought in are not vitamins. They are a combination of a potent, long-acting sedative and a beta blocker. In small, continuous doses like this, they wouldn't kill you quickly. They would simulate a natural decline, causing chronic fatigue, confusion, dizziness, and eventual organ failure. It's a very calculated method." The word calculated hung in the air, sharp and cold. He wasn't just saying she was poisoning me. He was saying she was doing it with the patience of a spider weaving its web. I couldn't form a word. My throat was a knot of sandpaper and glass. The floral pattern on my kitchen wallpaper seemed to swim before my eyes, the cheerful little roses blurring into ugly crimson smears. He continued, his voice now laced with a gentle urgency. "Ma'am, this is a criminal matter. My legal obligation is to report this, but I wanted to inform you first. Are you safe right now? Is your daughter-in-law with you?" The question jolted me back into my body. Safe? I hadn't been safe in 5 years. I was a prisoner who had only just realized the bars were made of kindness and concern. "No," I managed to whisper, the single word scraping its way out. "I'm alone." He advised me to go to the police, to not return home if she was there, to seek immediate protection. I thanked him, my voice sounding like a stranger's, and hung up the phone. The click of the receiver settling into its cradle was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on my old life, on the woman who believed in the goodness of her family. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the ghost of Brenda's laughter and the phantom clink of a pill against a water glass. I stood there for a long time, my hand still resting on the phone, the plastic cool against my skin. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 o'clock, its deep, familiar bongs marking the passage of time in a world that no longer made sense. I looked around my kitchen, at the copper pots George had bought me for our 10th anniversary, at the recipe box filled with decades of handwritten cards. Every object was a memory, and every memory was now tainted, coated in the grime of a 5-year lie. The woman who had touched these things, who had sat at this table, was a murderer in waiting. My first coherent thought was not of anger, but of a profound, bottomless sorrow for my son, David, my sweet, hard-working boy, so oblivious, so utterly betrayed. Was he just a fool, blinded by her performance? Or was he something worse? The question was a venomous snake coiling in my gut. I pushed it away, unable to bear its sting. I couldn't think about that yet. Thinking about David would break me, and I could not afford to break. Not now. I had survived the poison. Now I had to survive the truth. Slowly, I walked to the pantry and reached for the heavy porcelain pot. My hands were steady now, fueled by a strange, icy calm that was settling over the initial shock. I lifted the lid. Inside, the mountain of white pills seemed to gleam with a malevolent light. They were no longer just symbols of my suspicion. They were evidence. Hundreds of tiny, chalky soldiers lined up to testify on my behalf. For 5 years, I had been a victim. In that moment, holding the weight of her crime in my hands, I decided I would no longer be one. The betrayal was so immense, so all-encompassing, that it clarified everything. All the little things that had bothered me over the years clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. The way she would insist on pouring my tea, the subtle way she discouraged friends from visiting for too long, claiming I needed my rest. Her constant refrain of, "You're not as young as you used to be, Mom," wasn't a statement of care. It was a command. A slow, gentle brainwashing designed to make me accept my own erasure from the world. I placed the pot on the kitchen table, a centerpiece of pure evil. The baker in me, the woman who understood recipes, saw the situation with a new, chilling clarity. Brenda had her recipe: one pill, a glass of water, a sweet smile, repeated daily for 5 years. The intended result was my quiet, tragic death, leaving behind a grieving son and a sainted daughter-in-law who would inherit this house, this life. But she had made one critical error. She had underestimated the main ingredient: me. Now it was my turn to create a recipe. Not for strudel, but for justice. That afternoon, I waited. The calm resolve was my shield. I sat in George's old armchair, the one with the velvet worn smooth over the years, and I watched the clock. At precisely 4:30, just like every other day, I saw her sensible blue sedan pull into my driveway. The sound of the car door shutting was no longer a comfort. It was a threat. I heard her keys jingle at the lock, the familiar sound now as menacing as a rattlesnake's warning. The door opened, and she walked in, bringing with her a gust of cold autumn air and the scent of her floral perfume. "Hi, Mom," she chirped, her smile as bright and empty as a doll's. "How are you feeling today? You look a little pale." She placed a bag of groceries on the counter, her movements efficient and practiced. I watched her, really watched her, for the first time. I saw the tightness around her eyes that her smile didn't quite reach, the almost imperceptible flicker of impatience in her movements. She was an actress on a stage, and I had been her most captivated audience. Today, the spell was broken. "I'm feeling clearer today, Brenda," I said, my voice even. "Much clearer than I have in a long time." She didn't catch the double meaning. She just patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt like a brand on my skin. "That's good to hear. Maybe you're finally turning a corner." She bustled around the kitchen, putting away the groceries, her back to me. Her casual confidence was staggering. She had no idea that the frail old woman in the armchair now held the power to destroy her world completely. She began preparing a cup of tea, her movements a familiar ballet of domestic care. She filled the kettle, took down my favorite china cup, and selected a tea bag. I watched her every move, my heart beating a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. For a terrifying second, I wondered if she put something in the tea as well, if the poison was in everything she touched. The fear was a cold spike, but I pushed it down. I would not drink anything she made. Not anymore. "Here you go, Mom," she said, placing the steaming cup on the small table beside my chair. "A nice chamomile to help you relax before dinner." I looked from her smiling face to the cup, then back again. The steam rose in a delicate wisp, carrying the faint, sweet scent of the tea. It looked so innocent, so comforting. But I knew better. Everything she did was a performance, and I was no longer willing to play my part. "Thank you, dear," I said, forcing a small, weak smile. "I'll let it cool for a bit." She sat on the ottoman across from me, launching into a story about a sale at the department store. I nodded and made the appropriate sounds of interest, but I wasn't listening. I was studying her, cataloging the details of the monster who had fooled us all. The perfectly manicured nails, the simple gold wedding band that David had placed on her finger, the genuine-looking concern in her eyes as she spoke. She was a masterpiece of deception, and as she chattered on, my plan began to form, solidifying from the mists of anger and fear. The police were not the first step. The doctor was right, but he didn't understand Frankenmuth. Here, reputation was everything. If I, Margaret Miller, suddenly accused the town's resident angel of attempted murder, they would think I'd finally lost my mind. They would see a confused, grieving widow lashing out. Brenda would cry, David would be forced to defend her, and I would be quietly shipped off to a nursing home for my own good. My proof would be dismissed as the ramblings of a senile old woman. No, I needed a different strategy. I needed an ally, someone with authority, someone whose word could not be so easily dismissed, someone who would see the evidence and understand the cold, hard facts without being swayed by Brenda's carefully constructed facade. She had used my perceived weakness against me for years. Now, I would use it against her. She expected me to be frail, forgetful, and passive. She would never, in a million years, expect me to fight back with cold, calculated precision. When she left an hour later, promising to return in the morning to make breakfast, the house felt blessedly empty. The lingering scent of her perfume was a violation, and I opened a window to let the crisp night air chase it away. Then, I went to George's old desk in the study. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out the heavy, leather-bound address book. My fingers, trembling slightly, flipped through the pages until I found the name I was looking for: Arthur Jenkins, attorney at law. Arthur had been George's friend since they were boys. He was a quiet, serious man now. Semi-retired, but his mind was as sharp as a tack. He had handled our wills after George passed, and I remembered his kindness, but also his meticulous attention to detail. He wasn't a man who suffered fools or hysterics. He was a man who believed in facts and evidence. He would listen. More importantly, he would believe me once he saw the proof. Picking up the phone again felt different this time. My hand was rock steady. I dialed his office number, praying he still kept his old line active. It rang 3 times, and then his voice, older and gravelly but unmistakably his, answered. Jenkins. He didn't waste words. I took a deep breath, the air feeling clean and new in my lungs. Arthur, I said, my own voice sounding stronger than it had in years. It's Margaret Miller. I need to see you. It's a matter of the utmost urgency. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp mind. He likely thought it was about my will, or some financial issue. Margaret, he said finally, his tone softening slightly. Of course. Is tomorrow morning too soon? Say, 9 o'clock at my office? His quick acceptance was a balm to my frayed nerves. 9 o'clock is perfect, Arthur, I replied. And Arthur? I'll be bringing evidence. After hanging up, I felt a profound shift inside me. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a paralyzing fog, but a sharp, focused energy. It was the fuel for what I had to do. Next, I walked back into the kitchen and looked at the porcelain pot. It was more than just a container of pills now. It was my voice. It was the story of the last 5 years. A story that was finally going to be told, not in whispers of suspicion, but with the undeniable power of truth. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't just pretend to take the pill Brenda had left for me on the nightstand. I picked it up, walked into the bathroom, and flushed it down the toilet. The sound of the water swirling away was a declaration of war. It was a small act, but it was everything. I was no longer just passively collecting the evidence of her crime. I was actively rejecting her control over me. The game had changed, and she didn't even know it had begun. I slept in George's armchair that night, the porcelain pot on the floor beside me like a loyal guard dog. I didn't want to be in my bed, a place that felt contaminated by the nightly ritual of betrayal. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't feel tired. I felt vigilant, alert, like a soldier on the eve of a great battle. I watched the moon move across the sky, its pale light illuminating the familiar shapes of my living room, and I prepared myself for the morning. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, I was already up and dressed. I made my own coffee, strong and black, and the familiar aroma felt like reclaiming a piece of my own home. I took the jam jar I had used for the hospital trip and filled it. Again, this time with a larger quantity of the pills from the pot. I placed the jar, along with the official lab report from the University of Michigan hospital that the doctor had emailed me, into my large handbag. As I stood by the front door, ready to leave for my appointment with Arthur, I caught my reflection in the hall mirror. I saw a thin, white-haired old woman, her face etched with the lines of age and sorrow. For a moment, doubt flickered. Could this woman really do this? Could she take on the perfect daughter-in-law, convince the town, and protect her son from the fallout? But then I looked closer, into my own eyes, and behind the fragility, I saw a glint of something else. It was the hardened steel of a survivor. The baker from Frankenmuth was done being a victim. My recipe was ready. All the ingredients were measured and waiting. The drive to Arthur Jenkins's office on Main Street was a journey through a town that suddenly felt alien. The familiar Bavarian style, Storefronts with their cheerful flower boxes and charming murals seemed like a painted backdrop for a play I no longer had a part in. Each friendly wave from a neighbor I passed felt like a small sting, a reminder of the public face Brenda wore and the private one I was about to expose. My handbag sat heavy on the passenger seat, not just with the weight of the jar and the lab report, but with the immense gravity of what I was about to set in motion. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about destroying the perfect image my son had built his life around. Arthur's office was exactly as I remembered it from when George was alive. A quiet, wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and faint pipe tobacco. It was a scent of stability, of facts and order. Arthur himself looked older, his shoulders a little more stooped, but his eyes were as sharp and intelligent as ever. He greeted me with a gentle warmth reserved for old friends, ushering me to one of the worn leather chairs in front of his massive oak desk. He assumed, I could tell, that this was about a change to my will or some trouble with property taxes. His calm demeanor made the storm inside me feel even more chaotic. "Margaret, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under happier circumstances," he began, folding his hands on the desk. "What can I do for you?" I took a deep, shaky breath, the prepared words I had practiced all morning vanishing from my mind. Instead of speaking, I simply reached into my handbag. My hand closed around the cool glass of the jam jar. I pulled it out, along with the folded lab report, and placed them on the polished surface of his desk. The clink of the jar against the wood was a small, sharp sound that seemed to cut through the room's dusty silence. Arthur stared at the jar filled with the little white pills, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked from the jar to my face, his expression a mixture of concern and bewilderment. He clearly thought I was having some kind of episode, that grief and age had finally muddled my mind. "Margaret, what is this?" he asked, his voice gentle, the way one speaks to a frightened child. I didn't answer. I just pushed the folded papers from the University of Michigan hospital toward him. "Read it, Arthur," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Please, just read it." He unfolded the report, his eyes scanning the first few lines with professional curiosity. Then I saw it, the subtle shift. His back straightened, the gentle concern. In his eyes sharpened into a focused, horrified intensity. He read the entire document in complete silence, the only sound in the room the faint rustle of the paper in his steady hands. When he finished, he didn't look at me. He looked at the jar of pills, then back at the report, as if trying to reconcile the two realities. Finally, he lifted his gaze to mine, and the old, kind friend was gone. In his place was the lawyer, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. "For how long, Margaret?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. 5 years, I said, and the admission, spoken aloud in this safe room, almost broke me. Every night. She called them my vitamins. Arthur leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. He ran a hand over his face, the gesture of a man confronting something so vile it defied immediate comprehension. For a full minute, he said nothing, simply staring at the evidence on his desk. He was connecting the dots, I knew. My thinning frame at church, my supposed senior moments that Brenda so lovingly reported to everyone. He was reevaluating every interaction he had witnessed for the past 5 years through this new, horrifying lens. "Going to the police right now would be a mistake," he said finally, his voice hard as granite. "It would become your word against hers. Brenda has spent 5 years building a reputation as a saint in this town. You, forgive me for being blunt, have been painted as a frail, slightly confused old woman. They would see this," he gestured to the jar, "and her lawyer would claim you're senile and have been hoarding your own medication. We need more than the poison, Margaret. We need to catch the poisoner in the act." The cold logic of his words was both terrifying and deeply comforting. He believed me, and he was already building a fortress around me. His plan was methodical, precise, and required a level of deception that made my stomach churn. First, he made a call to my bank manager, a man he knew. Personally, and with my verbal consent over the phone, He had a temporary freeze put on any large withdrawals and a notification system set up for any activity on my accounts. Second, he insisted I give him temporary power of attorney, effective immediately, to protect my assets. She's been patient, Arthur said, his eyes cold. Her goal is the inheritance. Your house, your savings. We have to cut off the motive before we expose the crime. I signed the papers, my hand surprisingly steady. Each stroke of the pen felt like taking back a piece of my life. The most difficult part of his plan was the next step. You have to go home and act as if nothing has changed, he instructed, his gaze unwavering. You are still the sweet, fading Margaret. You will let her come over. You will let her make you tea. You will not, under any circumstances, let her know that you know. We need her to feel safe. We need her to continue her routine. The thought of sitting across from her, of smiling while she unknowingly performed for a hidden audience, was nauseating. It was the hardest thing he could have asked of me, but I saw the necessity in it. My weakness had been her weapon. Now, my performance of that weakness would become my own. He also arranged for a security expert, a discreet man he trusted, to come to my house the very next afternoon under the guise of upgrading my smoke detector system. His real job would be to install a series of tiny, motion-activated cameras in the kitchen and living room. We need to see her hand you the pill, Margaret. We need to have it on video, Arthur explained. The idea of my home, my sanctuary, being wired for surveillance felt like a profound violation, another layer of Brenda's poison seeping into the very walls. But it was a necessary violation, a surgical strike to cut out the disease she had introduced into my life. Walking out of Arthur's office, I felt strangely light, as if a physical burden had been lifted. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but it was no longer a paralyzing weight. It had been joined by a sense of purpose, a clear path forward forged in the cold fire of Arthur's logic. He had given me more than a legal strategy. He had given me an anchor in the storm. I was no longer a lone victim drifting in a sea of confusion. I was a client. I was a survivor with a plan. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of the old Margaret Miller, the woman who ran a household, raised a son, and baked the best strudel in the county. That evening when Brenda arrived was my first test. She walked in with her usual bright smile, carrying a container of soup she had made. Chicken noodle, Mom, your favorite, to help you get your strength back. The smell of it, which once would have been a comfort, now seemed cloying and false. I had to force myself to smile back, to thank her, to play the part of the grateful, ailing mother-in-law. Every word felt like a lie. I had to swallow, and it tasted more bitter than any of her pills. My kitchen, my own familiar space, felt like a hostile stage where I was the lead actress in a terrifying drama. I sat at the table while she bustled around, her back to me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I kept thinking of Arthur's words, act as if nothing has changed. I focused on my breathing, on the texture of the wooden table beneath my fingertips, on anything to keep from screaming. She turned, holding my nightly glass of water and the single white pill in her palm. "Time for your vitamins, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit concern. This was the moment. I had to take it from her hand, look into her eyes, and pretend. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly. I prayed she would see it as a sign of my usual frailty, and not the monumental effort it was taking to keep from recoiling. Her fingers brushed against mine as she dropped the pill into my palm. The touch was fleeting, but it felt like being seared by ice. I met her eyes and forced a weak smile. "Thank you, dear. You take such good care of me." The words came out, sounding convincingly frail. She smiled back, a picture of loving devotion, and I saw with chilling clarity the absolute emptiness behind her eyes. There was nothing there. No love, no empathy, just a patient, predatory void. After she left, I collapsed into George's armchair, my body shaking with the delayed shock and the sheer effort of the performance. I had done it. I had survived the first encounter. The pill was still clenched in my fist, a small, hard piece of proof. I didn't hide this one in the pot. Instead, I opened my hand and stared at it, lying in the center of my palm. It looked so innocuous, so harmless. A tiny instrument of a monstrous, patient evil. This was the enemy, and I had just looked it in the eye without flinching. A small surge of strength, cold and unfamiliar, flowed through me. The next day, the security expert came. He was a quiet, professional man who moved through my house with quiet efficiency. Brenda was out at a church luncheon, a fact Arthur had conveniently discovered and timed the appointment around. As the man worked, drilling tiny, almost invisible holes for the camera lenses, I felt a strange sense of detachment. He was a stranger, altering the fabric of my home, but it felt right. He was sterilizing the space, preparing it for the truth. When he was done, he showed me, on his tablet, how the cameras worked, how they would upload footage to a secure server that only he and Arthur could access. My private life was now evidence in waiting. Living with the cameras was a new kind of discipline. I had to be constantly aware of them, not for my own sake, but to ensure my performance was flawless. I moved slower. I feigned more confusion when Brenda was around. I even misplaced my glasses twice, allowing her to find them for me with a condescending pat on my arm. Each act of feigned helplessness was a carefully placed stone in the trap we were building. It was utterly exhausting, but with each passing day, I felt a part of myself hardening, becoming more resilient. The soft baker's hands were learning how to handle weapons. My internal world was a battlefield. One moment, I would be filled with a righteous, icy rage that fueled my every action. The next, a wave of crippling grief for David would wash over me. I would see his childhood face in my mind, his trusting eyes, and the thought of what this truth would do to him would nearly bring me to my knees. How does a son recover from knowing his mother was almost murdered by his wife? The guilt of my role in his future pain was a constant, heavy companion. It was the price of my survival, and I wasn't sure if either of us could afford it. A week after my meeting with Arthur, an unexpected conflict arose. Brenda came over one afternoon with a stack of financial documents. "Mom, I was looking over your accounts, and I think we should consolidate some of these investments. It's too much for you to manage," she said, her tone smooth and reasonable. It was a clear power grab, a move to get more control. A month ago, I would have agreed meekly, too tired and confused to argue. But now, I had Arthur's voice in my head. "Just tell her your husband's old lawyer is looking everything over as a favor," he had coached me. "Keep it simple, don't explain." So I did. I looked at her, my expression deliberately vague and a little confused. "Oh, that's kind of you, dear," I said, my voice soft. "But Arthur Jenkins is already taking a look at everything for me. George always trusted him so. He'll let us know what's best." The surprise that flashed across her face was instantaneous and profound. It was a crack in her perfect composure. She had not expected resistance, not even this gentle, passive kind. She had certainly not expected me to consult a lawyer. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than confidence in her eyes. It might have been annoyance, or it might have been fear. She recovered quickly, of course. "A lawyer? Mom? You don't need to spend money on that. I can handle it for you." She pushed, her smile a little too tight. But I held my ground, simply repeating that Arthur was an old friend and it was already handled. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue. I just presented it as a simple, unchangeable fact. She eventually dropped the subject, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The balance of power, so long tilted in her favor, had just been nudged, ever so slightly, back toward me. She left earlier than usual that day, a thoughtful, calculating look on her face. That small victory was a turning point. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but it was the first time I had pushed back against her control and won. I had followed the plan, used the tools Arthur had given me, and it had worked. That evening, as I went through the nightly ritual of pretending to take the pill she left me, I felt different. The act was no longer just about survival. It was strategic. I was no longer just a victim collecting evidence. I was an active combatant in my own liberation, gathering intelligence behind enemy lines. The fear was still present, but it was now a tool, a whetstone that was sharpening my resolve. A few days later, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Eleanor from the church baking committee and invited her over for coffee. Brenda had subtly discouraged these visits, always saying I needed my rest, and I had let the friendships wither. When Eleanor arrived, her face lit up. "Margaret, it's so good to see you," she said, wrapping me in a warm hug. We sat in my living room, the hidden cameras silently watching, and we talked for 2 hours. We talked about our gardens, our grandchildren, and the old days. It was normal. It was life. And it was a life Brenda had tried to steal. From me. Having Eleanor in my home, filling it with genuine laughter and warmth, was like letting fresh air into a sealed tomb. It reminded me of who I was before the fog descended. A woman with friends, with interests, with a voice. When she left, I felt a profound sense of clarity. Brenda hadn't just been trying to kill my body. She had been trying to kill my spirit, isolating me from everything that gave my life meaning and joy. The conversation with Eleanor was an act of rebellion, a reclaiming of my own social existence. I was reconnecting the threads to the world that Brenda had so carefully tried to sever. That night, Brenda came over, and there was a new tension in her. She must have heard that Eleanor had visited. "I'm glad you're feeling well enough for company, Mom," she said, but her smile was brittle. "Just don't overdo it. You need to conserve your energy." It was the same old script, the same condescending concern, but this time, I heard it for what it was. Oh, warning, a command to get back in my box. I just smiled vaguely and said Eleanor's visit had been lovely, that it had done me a world of good. I didn't offer any other explanation. I didn't need to. The final piece of my transformation clicked into place that evening. Brenda was in the kitchen, preparing my nightly poison, and she dropped a spoon. It clattered loudly on the tile floor. "Oh, clumsy me," she laughed lightly. But as she bent to pick it up, her back to me, I saw her reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. For a split second, the bright, caring mask was gone. Her face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated frustration and contempt. It was a look of such venom that it stole the air from my lungs. It was the face of my murderer, caught in a moment of forgetting her performance. She straightened up, the smile back in place, and turned around, completely unaware of what I had seen. But I had seen it. It was the final, visceral confirmation I needed, more powerful than any lab report. In that moment, looking at her smiling face while the image of her true expression was burned into my mind, something inside me settled into a place of absolute certainty. The grief for my son was still there. The fear of the coming storm was real, but the last remnants of the weak, pliable Margaret she had created had been incinerated by the heat of that hateful glare. She looked at me, searching for the frail woman she thought she knew. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone else. Someone I was only just beginning to meet. The night of the reckoning felt different. The air in my house, now monitored by tiny, unseen eyes, was still and heavy with anticipation. I sat in George's velvet armchair, a prop in my own play, my heart a slow, steady drum against my ribs. The fear I had lived with for 5 years was still there, but it had a new shape. It was no longer a fog that confused me, but a cold, clear lens through which I saw everything with terrifying clarity. I was about to invite the monster to dinner, and for the first time, I was the one who had set the table for a feast of consequences. My hand was trembling when I dialed David's number, but I let the tremor carry into my voice. "Davy," I began, making my tone thin and reedy, the voice of the woman Brenda had tried to create. "I'm not feeling so well tonight, a bit dizzy. Could you possibly come over for a little while?" The lie felt like acid in my mouth, using my son's love as a lure in a trap. But it was a necessary cruelty, the only way to save him from the greater pain of a truth he would never believe without seeing it with his own eyes. He promised to be there in 20 minutes. He arrived looking worried, his brow furrowed with the familiar concern of a good son. Brenda was already there, having let herself in to prepare my evening routine. She played her part perfectly, fussing over me, fluffing my pillows, and telling David how she worried I was overdoing it. "She had a friend over the other day. Can you believe it?" she said with a light, chiding laugh. "I keep telling her to rest." They stood together, my son and his wife, a perfect portrait of a loving family, unaware that the frame was about to shatter into a million pieces. The moment came, as it always did, after the evening news. Brenda walked from the kitchen, the soft clinking of the glass, and the pill a sound that would forever be etched in my memory. She held it out to me, her smile a perfect, practiced curve. "Here you go, Mom. Time for your vitamins." David watched from the doorway, his expression soft with gratitude for the woman taking such wonderful care of his mother. I looked at the pill in her hand, then up at her face, and for the first time in 5 years, I let the mask of compliance fall from my own. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a gunshot. Brenda's smile faltered, a tiny crack in the porcelain facade. David looked confused. "No?" Brenda repeated, her voice losing its gentle lilt. "Mom, don't be difficult. You need these to keep your bones strong." She tried to press the glass into my hand, her touch insistent, almost aggressive. I pulled my hand back, keeping my gaze locked on hers, letting her see the stranger who was now looking out through my eyes. "I know what's in it, Brenda," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the water in the glass. "I've always known." A flicker of pure panic crossed her face before being replaced by an exaggerated, concerned laugh. "Oh, Mom, what are you talking about? You're confused again." She turned to David, her eyes wide with feigned worry. "See, David? This is what I was worried about. She's not herself." But before my son could respond, before he could be drawn back under her spell, the doorbell rang, a sharp, decisive chime that signaled the end of the performance. Arthur Jenkins walked in without waiting for an invitation. He wasn't the kind old friend from the office. He was an imposing figure of authority, his face grim, his eyes like chips of ice. In his hand, he held a thin file folder. He didn't acknowledge David or Brenda. He walked directly to me and then turned to face them, his presence filling the room with an undeniable gravity. "Brenda Miller," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I believe you have something in your hand that belongs to my client." Brenda stared at him, her mouth opening and closing silently. All the color had drained from her face. Arthur didn't wait for her to speak. He opened the folder and placed a document on the coffee table for David to see. "This is a toxicology report from the University of Michigan Hospital," Arthur stated, his voice cutting through the tension. "It's an analysis of the vitamins your wife has been administering to your mother every night for the last 5 years. They are not vitamins. They are a systematic poison designed for a slow, undetectable decline." David stared at the paper, his mind visibly struggling to process the words. He looked from the damning report to his wife's terrified face, then to my own, which was calm for the first time in years. He was a man watching his entire world being dismantled, beam by beam, in the space of a single heartbeat. The love, the trust, the life he had built. It was all turning to ash right before his eyes. "Brenda?" he whispered, the name a question filled with a universe of pain and disbelief. The final, devastating blow came from Arthur. "And in case there was any doubt," he said, gesturing subtly toward the ceiling corner, "every moment in this room for the past 2 weeks, including this one, has been recorded." That was it. The last thread of Brenda's composure snapped. The mask didn't just crack. It disintegrated, revealing the twisted, venomous face I had seen reflected in the oven door. Her expression collapsed into a rictus of pure hatred and defeat. The performance was over. The audience had seen the truth. The police were discreet when they arrived a few minutes later, a courtesy Arthur had arranged. There were no sirens, no flashing lights to alert the neighbors. Just 2 quiet, professional officers who escorted a silent, shattered Brenda out of my home and out of my life. After the door closed, a profound silence descended upon the room. heavier and more complete than any I had ever known. It was the sound of an ending. It was the sound of a war finally being over. I sat with David in that silence for a long time. He was broken, a hollowed-out shell of the man who had walked in an hour earlier. He kept shaking his head, whispering, "I didn't know," over and over again, the words a desperate prayer for an absolution I knew he would struggle to grant himself. I reached out and took his hand. "It wasn't your fault, Davy," I told him, my voice finally my own again. "She fooled us both, but we're not fools anymore. Our healing would be a long, painful road, but for the first time, we were walking it together in the harsh, cleansing light of truth." The legal proceedings were swift. With the lab report, the video evidence, and the mountain of pills from my porcelain pot, Brenda had no defense. Her reputation as the town saint evaporated overnight, replaced by the shocking truth of her monstrous deception. The motive, as Arthur had suspected, was my inheritance. She had grown impatient, waiting for me to fade away naturally. Her conviction brought a quiet, solemn sense of justice, but no joy. It was simply the closing of a terrible chapter. The first tangible sign of my victory wasn't the verdict. It was a smell. A few weeks after Brenda was gone, I walked into my kitchen, pulled out the flour, the sugar, the apples, and the cinnamon, and I baked a strudel. As the warm, sweet scent filled the house for the first time in years, chasing away the phantom smell of lemon polish and deceit, I felt a part of my own soul returning. I was no longer just a survivor of a crime. I was Margaret Miller, the baker, and my home was a sanctuary of my own making once more. The town's reaction was a wave of shock that slowly transformed into a quiet, profound respect. My friend Eleanor came over, her eyes filled with a mixture of horror and admiration. "We all saw you getting weaker, Margaret," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "We thought it was just age. We had no idea you were fighting a war in your own kitchen." I was no longer the frail, confused old woman in their eyes. I was the woman who had outsmarted a poisoner, the woman who had saved herself with nothing but patience and a porcelain pot. My real conquest wasn't in the courtroom, it was in my garden. I walked among my blue hydrangeas, their heavy heads bobbing in the Michigan breeze, and I could name them all without hesitation. The mental fog, which I had been conditioned to accept as a symptom of my age, was gone. It had never been my age at all. It was her poison. Feeling the sun on my face, breathing in the clean air, I felt a clarity and strength I thought I had lost forever. I had not just won back my life, I had won back my mind. My relationship with David began to mend, not by ignoring the wound, but by cleaning it. Our conversations were honest and sometimes painful. He was grappling with immense guilt for not seeing what was happening, and I was learning to let go of the lonely burden I had carried for so long. The illusion of his perfect life was gone, but what was left in its place was something real and resilient. He started hauling parts on shorter routes to be home more, not out of duty, but out of a deep, rediscovered need to be present. I often find myself looking at the old velvet armchair where I spent so many nights in silent terror. The woman who sat there seems like a distant ancestor, a ghost from another life. She was a victim, a prisoner in her own home, a woman who had to make herself smaller and smaller, just to survive. I am not that woman anymore. The fear forged me into something new, something harder, and yet, somehow, more alive than I had been in years. The scar of Brenda's betrayal will always be there, but it is no longer a source of pain. It's a reminder of my own strength. The porcelain pot now sits on my mantelpiece. For a long time, I didn't know what to do with it. It felt wrong to throw it away, but painful to keep. Then one morning, I cleaned it meticulously, washing away the last chalky remnants of its dark purpose. I went out to my garden, cut the most perfect, vibrant blue hydrangea, and placed it in the pot. It is no longer an urn of secrets and betrayal. It is a vase. It is a testament to the fact that even the ugliest vessel can be used to hold something beautiful again. It's a strange thing to realize that the person you were 5 years ago is gone. That version of me, the trusting woman who believed in the simple goodness of a glass of water. She disappeared. But I don't mourn her. She had to fade away so that the woman I am today could be born. The woman who learned to fight in silence, who learned that the greatest act of defiance can be as simple as not swallowing. She is the one who survived. People often mistake quietness for weakness. They see a gentle nature and assume it is fragile. For years, I allowed that perception to define me, and Brenda used it as her primary weapon. She counted on me being too weak, too tired, and too confused to ever fight back. She never imagined that the greatest strength isn't found in a loud voice or a show of force, but in the quiet, stubborn will to endure, to observe, and to wait for the right moment to claim your truth. We all have a porcelain pot of our own, in a way, a place where we hide the things that frighten us, the truths we are not yet ready to face. It could be a quiet suspicion, a painful memory, or a secret fear. We keep them hidden away in the dark, hoping they will disappear. But my story taught me that those hidden things don't lose their power in the darkness. They only grow. The only way to disarm them is to bring them into the light, no matter how much it hurts. The truth, I've learned, is a lot like baking. It requires precise ingredients and a steady hand. It can be a messy, difficult process, and sometimes the heat feels unbearable. But if you are patient, if you trust the recipe that you know in your bones is right, the result is something that can nourish you, something that can restore you. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples can return to a house that has only known the stench of betrayal. It is possible to bake a new life from the ashes of the old one. So, when you look at an older person, a quiet neighbor, or even the face in your own mirror, remember that fragility can be a costume. Inside the quietest hearts, there can be a resilience as strong and unyielding as tempered steel. The world may see a frail old woman who loves to bake, but I know the truth, and now you do too. I am the woman who survived the poison, not with a sword, but with a secret. And the final recipe, the one for justice and for life, was all my own.